Hi, I'm Raylan Worcester, and this is Spreading the Word. That's Word with a capital W, as in the written Word, the Bible, and the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ. So today I'm going to share with you part 4 of Without Faith. So finally, all of the group from Mustard Seed Faith have found each other at the processing center. But now processing begins. What does that entail? Where do they go from here? And are they gonna still see each other after this? And what in the world is going on back home? Stay tuned to find out. So we'll pick up where we left off. Ding dong. This is the Oklahoma FEMA processing plant. This is not a detention center. All persons will be processed and transferred to other facilities. Containees numbers 97657 through 97812 report immediately to Processing A. Containees numbers 97813 through 97968 report immediately to Processing B. Announcement 2 of 8. Ding dong. Mark reluctantly stood up from the ground, pulling Laura to her feet. He wrapped his wife in his arms and buried his face in her hair. That's me, Processing B. Tears rolling down her face, Laura said, I can't let you go. We just found each other. And clung to him even tighter. Gently pushing away, Mark lifted Laura's chin and looked in her beautiful, watery eyes. I will see you on the train. Keep the faith. I love you. One last tender kiss and he was off, leaving the others to wonder what awaited him, and indeed them all, in Processing B. Processing B was a large building with a large lobby containing no chairs, but lots and lots of people. There was a pony wall that ran the width of the building, separating the lobby from 30 office cubicles, each with a door accessed by a pass-through door in the pony wall. The last 5 on the right were labeled red tag only. Above each door was a lit-up sign which either said occupied in red or enter in green. Upon entering the building, each containee walked to the back of the shortest line and waited their turn. When the green enter light came on above the door in front of them, they would walk through it for processing. Every 15 minutes or so, Mark noticed a group of people wearing blank red tags with check marks on them enter and stand in line in front of one of the doors to the right. He also noticed that no one entering any of the doors ever came back out. That was a little concerning. He decided to use his time in line praying silently rather than worrying or speculating. Sooner than he'd thought, the light above Mark's door switched from red to green. He took a deep breath, approached the door, and turned the knob. Inside was a small desk with a man in gray and black sitting at it and an empty chair facing him. The man flipped the form on his clipboard to the next fresh one and motioned to Mark to sit. He glanced at Mark's forehead and wrote his number on the top of the page, then proceeded to ask questions and note the answers on the form. Number 1, why were you arrested? To which Mark answered, for having church in a neighbor's basement. Number 2, were any Bibles discovered in your possession after they'd been outlawed? Yes, it was confiscated and destroyed. Number 3, do you consider Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior? Yes. Number 4. If denying him would spare your life, would you do it? No. Number 5. If denying him would spare your loved one's life, would you do it? Mark thought of his precious Laura and without hesitating a beat answered no. The last question on the form was for the interviewer. How sincere do you believe the answers to be? 1. Flat out lie. 2. Partially true. 3. Hesitant, assessing how to answer. 4. Mostly true. 5. Unwaveringly true. The interviewer circled number 5. He reached for a red tag from the shelf to his right, peeled off the back, and reaching across the table, stuck a tag reading TC5 on Mark's chest. Exit through the door behind me, he instructed. Walking around the desk, Mark opened the door directly behind it. It appeared to be a waiting room. Again, no chairs. Mark sat on the floor with the 9 other people already there. He glanced around, noticing one elderly man wearing a TC1, 4 other TC5s, 3 TC4s, and a TC3. Inside the room, the interviewer flipped a switch, changing the sign outside his door from occupied to enter. Mark was only in the holding room for 5 minutes when a militia officer with a gun came through the door to the rear of the room. He told everyone to get on their feet and hold hands and follow him. The gun was his insurance that no one would bolt and try to get away. The officer led the group to the front of Processing A and pushed them inside. Line up in front of the doors to your right, he instructed. Processing A looked identical to Processing B. The only difference was, this time, Mark would be going through the doors marked red tag only. In this room, Mark discovered, instead of a desk, there was a low stainless steel table for Mark to sit on. The person with the clipboard wore a white coat and stethoscope over the gray shirt and black pants. He proceeded to take Mark's blood pressure, blood sugar, and temperature, noting the numbers on his form. He had Mark stand on a scale. Had he really lost 20 pounds in just over a month? He asked him if he took medication on a regular basis and when the last time was he'd seen a doctor. He asked and noted Mark's age. At the bottom of the form for the examiner's use only were the following instructions. If containing entered without a tag and you deem them to be in decent health, put a blank red tag with a check mark in the lower right corner on their chest. B. If containing entered without a tag and you deem them to be in less than decent health or above 80 years of age, put a red TC1 sticker on their chest. C. If containing comes in with a TC tag, you only need to put a black check mark in the lower right corner of their tag if you deem them to be in decent health. D. If a containing comes in with a TC tag and is discovered to be sick or above 80 years old, switch their tag for a TC1. The examiner took out a Sharpie and put a check mark on Mark's tag and told him to exit to the holding room behind him. About 10 minutes in the holding room this time, and Mark and a group of others labeled TC5 were led by militia with guns around the perimeter of the facility, through the front gate, and into a cattle car on a train marked TC5. One by one, the friends departed as the announcements came throughout the day. They stayed in their grassy spot, nibbling on bologna and sipping water, leaving only to use the latrine. Crackers were being saved for the trip. To pass the time, they took turns telling the others about their home lives, their families, vacations they'd taken, happier times. Each time a number was called, they'd all stand and tearfully hug and make promises to pray, reassuring one another that God was with them. Ding dong! This is the Oklahoma FEMA processing plant. This is not a detention center. All persons will be processed and transferred to other facilities. Containees numbered 99529 through 99684. Report to Processing A immediately. Containees numbered 99685 to 99840. Make your way to Processing B immediately. This is the final announcement of the evening. Everyone else, make your way to the Containee Billeting Building. You have 1 hour to arrive before the doors are locked for the night. Announcement 8 of 8. Ding dong! The time had come. Jack, Sonia, and Danny were all that remained in the grassy area that they had come to call our spot. They had so few possessions here that it seemed natural to latch on to the piece of grass that had offered one of the only snippets of comfort available to them and claim it as their own. As the three stood and hugged for the last time, they realized that none of them would miss it. Jack and Sonia left hand in hand for Processing B. They'd started this journey together. It was appropriate they'd finish it together. Danny made his way to Containee Billeting for the last time. It was dark out, but the strategically placed floodlights lit the way. On the shadowed walk, he started to encounter others making their way to the billeting building, and wiping away a tear reminded himself that he was not alone. Danny looked around the room as he entered the building. It seemed so empty. He guessed there were probably 150 or so of them left. They all found spots on the bottom platform, seeking the comfort of being close to another human being, whether they knew them or not. At least we all have plenty of pillows and blankets, Danny thought wryly. Danny knew he would have trouble sleeping this night. Concern for his friends and the uncertainty of what would happen in processing tomorrow, each fought for control of his mind. Be still and know that I am God. I will never leave you nor forsake you. His faithful companion spoke to his soul. Danny adjusted the sleeping bag bunched under his head to a more comfortable position, and without another care, drifted off to sleep long before the lights even went out. Ding dong! This is the Oklahoma FEMA processing plant. This is not a detention center. All persons will be processed and transferred to other facilities. This is your wake-up call. There will be no commodities today. Containees numbers 99841 to 100000. Report immediately to Processing A. Upon completion there, you will be taken to Processing B. Announcement 1 of 8. Ding dong! No commodities today, thought Danny. Thank God I saved my crackers, and I still have that waxy bologna ring in my bag if worse comes to worse. But what about water? He had finished yesterday's water. How do you choke down crackers without water? Remembering the Lord's admonition of last night, Danny stilled his clamoring mind. God would make a way. He always does. Danny heaved a sigh and, unable to put it off any longer, made his way to processing A. Before the second announcement of the day sounded, all 100,000 of the initial batch of containees had been processed. The militia took the last of them and loaded them into the waiting trains. He cued his walkie-talkie and gave the command to roll them out. Slowly, on different tracks, bound for different locations, the trains began to move. In admin, the militia general completed his tabulations with a smile. This initial phase of processing had gone very well indeed. Of the 100,000 processed, 3,800 of them had been children or teens. 5,248 of them had been sick or elderly. 9,431 were found to be non-believers, flounders unintentionally snagged in the salmon nets. There were 22,509 fence sitters, those whose answers in the interview were wavering or insincere, not able to totally commit one way or the other. The rest, 59,012, were fervents, foolishly, stubbornly loyal to an unseen God that the general was certain did not even exist. He relished the thought of what awaited them when they once again debarked the train. The general brought up his email and fired off the report to the vice president. She would be very pleased. Gloria lay in her bed in staff billeting until after the second announcement. There was no commodities today, so for the first time since she was stationed here, didn't have to get up at 4:30 a.m. to prepare for the day. The next batch of trains holding the second 100,000 containees wouldn't arrive until later this week. She thought about all that had transpired here during the processing center's maiden run. She thought about her divine encounter with 482 Anna in the latrines and all the friends she'd made here. She thought about the risks she took. She gave a little shudder. She thought about the fate that awaited the containees at their new destinations. I wish there was something I could do, her heart cried. There is. A still small voice within her replied. Where had that thought come from? Gloria couldn't do anything to help the fervents. They were already loaded on the trains. She shook her head, certain the stress of the place was driving her mad. My sheep know my voice. This must be the spirit Sonia had told her about. Excited, Gloria snuggled under her comforter and listened to see if he would say anything else. I know the plans I have for you, the voice continued. Then, like a movie reel playing, the plan began to unfold in Gloria's mind. Part 2. Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. James 2:17. Declined. The word flashed across the screen of the card reader. What? Why? Trevor knew he had at least 2,000 credits left on the card. When he couldn't get his mother's prescription, he figured it was because the card was in a different name. But now he couldn't buy milk? What was going on? Hey, Trev, how's it going? Phil asked, coming through the door of the convenience store and spying his friend at the checkout counter. I don't know, Trevor answered, running his hand through his hair in frustration. This dumb card won't work, and I need milk for my kids. Help a brother out?" "Sure," Phil replied, pulling out his Freedom card and touching it to the screen. The card reader beeped and the screen showed that $7.62 in credits had been deducted from his account. "You better email the address on the back of your card and find out what's up," Phil advised, heading toward the beer cooler. "Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks." He raised a hand in farewell. "No sweat," Phil replied, as his friend walked out the door with his milk. It has to be a glitch, Trevor thought, as he fired off an email to the UBI office. After all, the Universal Basic Income Program and their Freedom Cards had only been in effect for 6 months. Surely there were still some bugs to work out. Everything had been working fine until today. The next morning, Trevor's phone rang. Caller ID said it was Phil calling. "Hey, buddy," Phil said when Trevor answered the phone. "Just calling to see if you found out what happened with your card. Some glitch in the system?" "No, man," Trevor responded. "The email said I was spotted handing out bottles of water to some people picketing outside a closed church before the militia arrived to arrest them." "Really? Did you?" "Well, yeah. It was hot out and they'd been out there for hours, and I just picked up a case of water. It seemed like the right thing to do. But the UBI office said that my act was abetting domestic terrorists and a crime. My card was shut off as punishment. They said for 1,500 credits, they will turn it back on. That will only leave me 500 credits to last the rest of the month. That barely buys groceries, much less pays bills." "That's tough," Phil commiserated. "Did you have them turn it back on?" "What choice did I have? No one takes money anymore." The call was getting a little too heavy for Phil, so he made an excuse and got off the line. As he was hanging up, a thought crossed his mind. Can they shut off my card for buying milk for someone who had abetted terrorists? Maybe it was time for Phil to choose new friends. "Mommy, I'm cold," 3-year-old Sylvie whined. "I know, baby. How about we get into our snuggliest jammies and get under the covers in Mommy's bed and eat popcorn and watch The Little Mermaid?" "Like a sleepover?" she asked, a lilt in her voice. "Like a sleepover." "Yay!" Sylvie ran to her drawer to pull out her fuzzy Little Mermaid feet jammies. The onesie was the warmest she owned, and she was going through a Little Mermaid phase, the perfect solution. Her card had been shut off for 3 days now. Marcy thought they would be all right. Their bills were paid and they had plenty of food to eat, but this morning the propane in the RV had run out. Marcy had been so self-assured when the militia had knocked on her door to confiscate her handgun. Her father had given her the Ruger LCP pistol and taught her how to use it for self-defense when she and Sylvie finally had the courage to leave her abusive husband. She took her family's old RV that still had half a tank of gas in it and got away as far as it would take her, then parked in a campground where they continued to live, paying for lot rent and propane. How the militia found her, she would never know. But she couldn't surrender the gun. It was vital to their survival. When she refused, she was surprised she wasn't arrested on the spot. She thought maybe they understood her need to keep the gun and changed their mind. Now she knew better. Sylvie came running back into the room as Marcy put the bag of popcorn into the microwave. Go climb in Mommy's bed. I'll be right there. Okay, Sylvie complied, grabbing the Little Mermaid DVD off a shelf. Marcy pushed the button on the heating unit that showed the current temperature inside, 53 degrees. It was supposed to be in the 30s tonight. She would have to call her parents. She poured the popcorn in a bowl and carried it into the RV's one bedroom where Sylvie lay, covers pulled up and tucked under her chin. 30 minutes into The Little Mermaid, only kernels were left in the popcorn bowl, and Sylvie was fast asleep. Marcy got up to make a phone call. Hi, Mom. I know it's late, but it's going to get real cold tonight, and we are out of propane. Can you and Dad come get us and let us sleep at your house? Oh, I see. Well, then can we use your card to buy some propane? Mine's been shut off. 1,500 credits. I won't have that for another week. Yes, we have extra blankets. Okay, then. Thanks anyway. Marcy hung up with a heavy heart. Her parents' car had been confiscated and crushed the previous week, she was told. Her mom couldn't risk having her card shut off for buying her propane. They had to be able to get their medications. Sylvie would have to forego the couch that the dinette morphed into, where she usually slept, so Marcy could hold her and keep her warm with body heat. She took her 2 extra blankets from the cubby above the dinette and climbed into bed next to her daughter. A tear slipped from her eye as she wondered if keeping the pistol had really been worth it. Bring, bring. Militia. Hi, the young-sounding voice said when the officer answered the phone. Is it true you guys are putting extra credits on our freedom cards if we turn in someone who's breaking the law? The officer hesitated a moment, then said, You know someone who is breaking the law? Maybe. The officer chuckled and said, Yeah, 100 credits for every tip we get that results in a fine or a temporary card shutoff. 200 credits if that person is a family member. 500 credits if your tip results in an arrest. 650 if that person is a family member. Cool, thanks, the caller said, then hung up the phone. Oh man, I am so getting rich. A distraught young girl grabbed the teddy bear off her bed and buried her face in its fur as her father continued to yell at her. You weren't supposed to find out, she sobbed. Well, then you shouldn't have left the test indicator in the trash in the bathroom, he pointed out. Sabina was 12, and she just found out she was pregnant. She'd snuck out to a party with some friends a few months ago, and, well, it just happened. She planned to go behind her parents' back and get an abortion before she started to show, and no one would ever have to know. They were legal now, and they were free for anyone under 18 who didn't have their parents' consent. When she told her dad of her plan to abort, he went ballistic. Over my dead body, he yelled, leaving her room and slamming the door. Sabina sat thinking for a moment. That's all it took to reach a decision. She'd show him. She picked up her phone and dialed a number that had been advertised on the news a lot lately. Hello, militia? Catherine barely recognized her husband anymore. The sweet, loving, gentle man she had married seemed quiet, sullen, and angry all the time. Catherine felt she had to walk on eggshells to avoid being snapped at. It started the day Sam came home from work and told her that his pay was being cut. What? Catherine had responded, rocked by the news. She had been expecting him to get the raise he had gotten every year on his anniversary date, not a pay cut. Especially now that they were raising Tim and Janice's two boys, they needed more income, not less. It's the damn government, he'd shouted, tossing the memo he'd gotten in place of the pay raise on the floor. They've instituted a new universal basic income for each household. Everyone receives the same amount of money, which is considerably less than I had been making. And I don't get a paycheck anymore. And we don't get food or health care coupons. No, now they put credits on a plastic card they are calling freedom money. What a joke. Trying to soothe her obviously distraught husband, Catherine had walked up and put her arms around him. But Sam did not want to be soothed. He shrugged out of her arms and into the bedroom, slamming the door. It felt good to be angry. Everything just happened around them, to them. They had no say in anything. Sam had known the government retreat thing the president tried to convince them of had been a bald-faced lie. It had been 6 months, and Catherine's brother and his wife still hadn't been heard from. They had to enroll the Parsons kids in school, buy them school clothes and supplies. He and Catherine had made plans to go on a cruise for their 15th wedding anniversary. That went out the window. Oh, he knew it wasn't the kids' fault. He felt for them, he really did. They just quit asking when their parents were coming home a couple of weeks ago. But Sam didn't like feeling manipulated. He didn't like feeling helpless. It made him angry. He didn't know what yet, but he was determined. He wasn't going to take the government's BS any longer. Sam was going to do something about it. In yet another part of the country, Sally knocked on Mrs. Harding's door. Hello, Mrs. Harding. May I borrow a cup of sugar? Of course, dear. Come on in. Have a seat right there on the sofa, and I'll be right back with it. She returned moments later with the sugar and asked, So what's the latest? Sally told her about her cousin who was found congregating in an abandoned bookstore, and about the elderly man who couldn't get his heart medication because his card had been docked for misused pronouns. So sad, Mrs. Harding replied, and sent Sally on her way with a hug. After Sally left, Mrs. Harding took a pie she'd baked the night before over to Betty Sue's house. Here, dear, she said when Betty Sue answered the door. Know you've been feeling poorly. Thought this might cheer you up. Betty Sue smiled, thanked her, and closed the door. She called her husband to the kitchen counter where they scooped the pie out into a bowl. On the bottom of the pie plate was a handwritten scripture and prayer requests for a young woman arrested for having church in an old bookstore, and an old man who incidentally was Betty Sue's sister's neighbor, whose card had been shut off for calling some girl she. The couple read the paper on the bottom of the pie plate a few times over, then burned it over the sink. They sat down and closed their eyes a few moments longer than it took to bless the pie they were about to eat. That Mrs. Harding could bake. Pie bowls empty and in the sink, where all remnants of ash had been washed down the drain, Betty Sue sent her husband over to the Whitfield's house to return a book she'd borrowed. On his way home, he would stop and visit Betty Sue's sister. He had some nitroglycerin pills he wanted to give her. Gerald Whitfield shook Thomas's hand as he returned the book his wife had borrowed. He surreptitiously slipped a note into Thomas's hand as he did. Tomorrow's prayer requests. Inside, Gerald opened the book to the dog-eared page and found a handwritten scripture and some prayer requests scribbled in the margins of the page in pencil. He reread the page several times within the next hour, then put the book in his bicycle basket and pedaled across town to the Winterman's house. "Here's that book you've been wanting to read," he said as their teenage daughter opened the door. "Thanks, Pastor Whitfield," the girl replied. By 6 o'clock, 20 homes had been visited, each borrowing or returning something. It was Thursday, the new Lord's Day, as congregating on Sundays had become too dangerous. The First Baptists had just had church. Washington, D.C. It was time for the President's monthly update. Anything that wasn't urgent or pressing was relegated to this meeting for discussion. President and Vice President Naylor were in attendance, as were Preston and General Hussing. "Preston, would you please have a page get us some coffee before we begin?" "Of course, President Naylor," Preston responded, shooting off a quick text. Bridget saw the text from the President's Chief of Staff. She jumped up and excitedly made her way to the cafeteria. Her first week at the White House, and she was getting the President coffee. She would get to meet him, be in the same room. She took careful note of the text, explaining how each person took their coffee. She would make no mistakes. She wanted to make a good impression. Making small talk until the coffee came, the President stopped abruptly as the door to the room began to open. Yes, come in. Set that tray right here on the table." Bridget complied, then picked up a cup and handed it to the President. "Here you go, sir," she said, "just the way you like it. And here is his," she said, handing the Vice President her coffee. In her eagerness to help and please, Bridget completely missed the looks of warning that Preston had been shooting her way. Satisfied she had done a good job, she asked to be excused and took her leave. Preston, "Taken care of, Mr. President." Preston walked to a corner of the room and made a discreet phone call. "White House Militia." "Bridget Hancock, new page. Extreme pronoun misusage." "Understood." Within 15 minutes, Bridget found herself unemployed with a worthless piece of plastic in her wallet. Any political aspirations forever down the drain. Thankfully, President Naylor didn't notice his faux pas. It wouldn't happen again. Preston walked back to the meeting and took his seat. "Now, where were we? Oh yes, General Hussing. What is the latest with the dissident issue?" General Hussing straightened in his chair and turned to face the President. "Well, I must say I am very pleased with the UBI and the federal money program. It's working exactly as intended. Of course, there was some uproar among some of the working class when it was instituted. Some of them were making outrageous money, and the universal basic income was less than they were used to getting. But those who were too vocal or demonstrative about it were fired or got introduced to the card's most useful feature, government shutoff. They soon realized that resistance was futile and decided to be grateful for what they were given. We've taken in over $1 million in restoration fee credits for those wanting to restore service to cars that had been shut off. A stroke of genius on your part, interrupted the president with a very rare compliment. Thank you, President Naylor. He no longer called him Mr. President or said, yes, sir. Singh was very careful with his pronouns now that he'd become the president's golden boy. It was a position he would fight to keep. Continue, the president instructed. Well, guns and Bibles are being turned over in droves. Picketing and congregating appear to be declining. The president nodded his approval and asked, and what are the consequences for each of these actions? Only terrorist activity results in arrest and a train ride to the processing center and camps. That would include breaking into closed churches, anyone picketing outside of them, congregating in secret for religious purposes, anyone found in possession of a Bible, heard quoting scripture, or singing religious songs, anyone found praying in public or elsewhere, and anyone trying to stop abortions from taking place. He took a sip of his coffee, then continued. Improper pronoun usage, abetting known terrorists, refusal to turn in guns, unauthorized usage of a vehicle, that would be anyone who is not part of the government farming program, and other minor infractions result in cards being fined or turned off until the restoration fee had been agreed to. Hey, whatever happened to those folks in Virginia who holed up in their cabins and booby-trapped the woods around their house? Jackie Naylor asked. General Singh smiled. So glad you asked. We shut off their cards until such time as they chose to hand over their weapons. They never did. After a month, we took ordnance experts into the woods and had the booby traps dismantled, then entered the cabins and found all the occupants dead from starvation, dehydration, and hypothermia. We cleaned out the cabins and confiscated a buttload of automatic and semi-automatic weapons, knives, you name it. It was quite a haul. And that wasn't an isolated incident. This system has been quite an effective tool. Good job, General, the president said. He turned his attention now to the vice president. And how is Operation Roundup progressing? Rust smiled to themselves as they asked the question. The name for the detention camp project had been their own idea. They were rounding up the terrorists, and Roundup had been the name of a weed killer a few years back that had been determined to cause cancer. It all fit nicely and seemed like the perfect name if they said so themselves, which they often did. Jackie responded, well, you know, the maiden run was quite successful. They discovered a few things that could be done differently to be more effective after that first group had been shipped off to the camps and implemented those for the second run. Nothing major, just little procedural things. The second run has just ended. They took the processing a little slower this time, processing fewer containees each day. One of the things they discovered was that the pace was very hard on the staff. They never got a day off, barely had time to eat, and so forth. It's imperative that the staff remain loyal and happy, so it was a necessary change. The president nodded thoughtfully. Yes, good call, Jackie. It's not like these people have anywhere else they need to be. They all chuckled a moment over the president's joke before Jackie continued. So now, 200,000 containees have been processed, and over 100,000 fervents have been identified and sent to Camp Baus in Arizona. The third run will start next week. And what's the status of those from the first two runs who've already been processed? Rust asked. Those from the first run arrived at their respective camps months ago. Nothing has been done with them yet. As you've so eloquently pointed out, there is no rush, and we decided that the longer they have to ponder what they've come to know will be their fate, the more frightened and compliant they will become. There were nods and murmurs of assent. Jackie now sipped her cold coffee, grimaced, and continued. Most of the second run trains have arrived at their destinations, and others are due to arrive any time. Next week, in coordination with the beginning of the third run at the processing center, the camps will begin to address the needs, shall we say, of the containees that have been sent there. The vice president leaned back in her chair, signaling that her report had been concluded. Well, I look forward to hearing about all that in next month's meeting, the president stated. Anyone have anything else? With no responses, Preston adjourned the meeting and the room emptied, each person proceeding to the next appointment on their busy agendas. Down the street, a stunned and angry Bridget sat crying at the counter of her favorite coffee bar. The good-looking 23-year-old barista that usually waited on her set a mocha latte in front of her. On me, he winked. Looks like you could use it. Thanks, she mumbled, looking up to find his kind eyes searching her face. Anything I can do? He added. Doubtful, she smirked. I just got canned by the President of the United States, and I doubt my Freedom Card works anymore. Here, let me see, he said, taking the card and ringing up the latte. Nope, dead as a doornail. Bridget sighed and angrily swiped at a tear making its way down her cheek. Now what do I do? She asked more to herself than to him. The barista looked both ways to make sure he was unobserved, then slid a card across the counter to Bridget. What's this? She asked, picking up the card. It was a website for something called the Noster Protocol. Shh, the barista warned. Just look it up, he whispered. It's a safe place to tell your story, but only tell it there, nowhere else. Militia ears hear everything. And I don't have to tell you that I'm putting myself at risk by giving this to you. Bridget swallowed the last of her latte and put the card in her wallet, right behind the worthless Freedom Card. Thanks, she said, rising from the stool to leave. Don't mention it, the barista said. No, I mean it. Don't. Oklahoma City, 4 months ago. The last of the trains from the maiden run departed the Oklahoma FEMA Processing Center, leaving only staff and militia on the grounds. The trains for the second run were due to arrive the first of the week, so the staff would all be getting a much-needed 4 days off. First, though, they'd been summoned to a mandatory meeting in the containee billeting building. It was bigger than the conference room and admin, allowing them all to meet at once instead of the multiple smaller meetings that had been held previously. Each staff and militia member took a seat on a sleeping platform, using the sleeping bags as cushion. When all had settled, the militia general cleared his throat and began. Our maiden run has been most successful. The vice president is quite pleased. She has mandated some changes for the next run, however. The next batch of processing will go much slower. We will be processing just over 1,000 containees a day, instead of 2,500. A cheer arose among the staff, and the general clapped his hands to gain their attention once more. Yes, your vice president loves you, and while she was most impressed with your ambition in exceeding expected processing goals, she was concerned about the cost to you, her most valuable assets. Therefore, starting with the next run, every staff will have 1 hour lunch breaks, work only 7-hour shifts, and have 2 days off per week. Militia will continue to work 12-hour shifts, but will rotate 4 days on, 3 days off. Again, the sound of applause filled the building. The general allowed them a moment of celebration before raising his hand one last time to bring them to order. The next trains arrive in 5 days, he continued. You will all have the next 4 days off and be back here 1 day before the containees arrive to receive your schedules and prepare your stations for work the next day. Before we leave today, there is much to be done. Sleeping bags need to be fumigated and laundered. Commodity food and sanitary items need to be inventoried and purchase orders made out. Latrine pits need to be covered over, filled with lime, and packed down. Bedding in staff billeting needs to be laundered. Toilets in staff billeting and mess need to be cleaned. Refrigerators in the mess need cleaned out and ovens cleaned. Supplies in the infirmary need to be inventoried and purchase orders made out. Linens on hospital beds need to be laundered and replaced. Grounds need to be taken care of. In addition, I need 1 volunteer for a special assignment. This is it. This was the first scene the movie reel played in my mind as the Spirit spoke to me, Gloria thought, as her hand shot up into the air, along with those of maybe 20 others. You, the redhead from Commodities. What's your name again? Gloria, sir. Gloria, come with me. The rest of you, grab your assignments on your way out. This meeting is adjourned. Gloria followed the general to the admin building and into his office, where he motioned her to take a seat. He locked the door behind him. Gloria, can you be discreet? Of course, General. And are you loyal to your government and its policies? Where else could my loyalties lie, General? Very good. There is one more change that will take place with the second run. He pulled a handful of small slips of paper out of his desk. He handed them to Gloria. These were given to the interviewers by the non-believers and some of the fence-sitters during the processing. She looked in horror at the scriptures cut from the latrine pit's toilet paper. Now she knew what Sonia had wanted the safety scissors for. Scissors she had supplied. The general reacted to the horror he saw reflected on her face. Exactly my reaction when I saw the garbage that was circulating right under our noses. The audacity to misuse the paper we generously provided for their bathroom necessities. But we won't make that mistake again. That's what I need you for. I need you to gather all the latrine paper and burn it. I ordered cases and cases of corn on the cob for the staff mess. You will refill the dowels on the posts with corn husks. The staff is going to be eating a lot of corn this run, but I know the cooks can be creative. Make cornbread, corn pudding, all manners of things. Corn husks are better anyway, the general thought. Biodegradable. Pleased with his brilliant solution, he asked, Any questions? No, General. Can you get it done before you leave today? If I get started right away, General. Then what are you waiting for? He unlocked the door and ushered Gloria from his office. Gloria grabbed plastic bags from commodities to put the Bible pages in and an N95 mask for the smell from the infirmary. She stopped by security and asked for the remaining maps, stating that the general had asked her to collect them as they would be replaced for the second run. She had a brief moment of anxiety, waiting for someone to call the general for confirmation, but they had all seen her leave with him for a special assignment, so they figured this was it. Heaving a sigh of relief and realizing she would now need to convince the general to have new maps made, she made one more stop at mess for an flame with which to make a fire, then hurried to the latrine pits to complete her task. Once inside the gate, Gloria noticed that those filling the latrine pits had their backs to her. She also knew there were no cameras in this area. The Lord had paved the way for her task. She took the stacks of maps she'd been holding, crumpled them, and put them in the plastic bags. Then she proceeded to each post, pulled off the sheets of Bible pages, and stuffed them in her waistband, pulling her shirt out over the top of her pants. Gloria moved from post to post, removing all the sheets. She'd been worried that they'd be too bulky beneath her clothes, but Bible pages, fortunately, were onion skin thin, and the granny panties she had put on this morning managed to hold them all. The last of the papers off the posts and in her plastic bags, she proceeded to the burn barrel, which had been set up behind the pits near the back fence. Now the workers were facing her, but they were all bent over shoveling lime, intent on their own responsibilities. She tossed all the plastic bags of paper into the burn barrel, pulling one paper out to set on fire with the flame. At the sound of the flame going up, some of the workers turned to watch what Gloria was doing. She hollered to a man nearby who had been shoveling lime. "Can you come dump some dirt on this fire and put it out, please?" The man lifted up his shovel and dumped it on the fire. He returned 2 more times until the fire was out and nothing was discernible in the barrel but dirt and ash. "The general would like you guys to spread these ashes in the pits," she told the men with shovels. As the men buried the evidence of her treachery, Gloria left the latrine pits, exultant that she'd pulled off her mission undetected. Gloria entered the mess and asked the woman cleaning the refrigerator if she knew where the cases of corn were kept. "The corn is in the walk-in," she replied. "The husks are in these boxes. I don't know why the general wanted us to shuck the corn and save these," she replied, shaking her head. "I will get them out of your way," Gloria answered, picking up the boxes. She took them to the pits and started poking the end of the dowels through them until every post contained corn husks. That done, it was time to go pack. And that is where we are going to end part 4 of Without Faith. Tune in next time to part 5 to find out what happens with the next run. If Gloria really got away with her subterfuge in the task the Lord had given her, and what happens next. You won't want to miss it. And if you're enjoying the story, please be sure to like and subscribe and tell all of your friends that they will want to tune in and listen to Without Faith. In this way, you can help spread the word. God bless you.